Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session, the Ride Regulation for Automated and Autonomous Driving, a topic that's increasingly in the news, increasingly being debated all around the world. As you know, this is, if come to fruition and if realized, automated and autonomous driving can have a significant social, economic, and environmental impact. The question, of course, is how to ensure that this transition yields a positive outcome for everyone involved. And that's exactly what we will discuss within the next 75 minutes. And for that, we have a great panel assembled for you. With us is the Minister for Transport, Building and Housing of Denmark. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Minister Ole Birk Olesen. And very delighted to have the Associate Minister for Transport of New Zealand with us, because this is actually his very first official trip in his function. So we very much welcome him here in Leipzig. Tim McIndoe, ladies and gentlemen, is here. We have with us the Head of Public Policy at X, which of course, as many of you know, is Google's in-house think tank, and the engineers I know are working tirelessly all around the clock to make the self-driving car a reality. How much so, we will find out. Sarah Hunter is here, ladies and gentlemen. We have with us the Senior Product Planning Manager and Automation Spokesperson at the Volvo Group. In that capacity, he is focused on automation and electromobility. Anders Kjellström is here with us, ladies and gentlemen. Representing the road transport operators, we have with us the President of the International Road Transport Union, the IRU, Christian Labro, ladies and gentlemen, is here. And last but not least, an assistant professor of law at the University of South Carolina. He is an internationally recognized expert on the law of self-driving vehicles. Very much curious to what he has to say. Professor Brian Walker-Smith is here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's get right to it, Minister Olesen. This topic, as I said, is one that is hotly debated around the world, filled with great expectations and hope. Now, from your point of view as a European country, as a Minister of Transport, tell us what your country in particular is currently engaged in when it comes to the automated driving topic.
Well, it's a big topic in Denmark also. Just yesterday, I was sitting in Parliament watching all the green lights of the members of Parliament voting yes for a new bill of test scheme of autonomous driving. So from the 1st of July, companies, municipalities, so on, can apply for a test scheme where they can, on ordinary roads in Denmark, test their autonomous driving vehicles. The only thing they have to do is to get an independent expert to vouch for the safety. And then, of course, afterwards, to make me, as a minister, believe in it. And then they could go on, because, for example, Volvo. If Volvo could make trucks go from one resting space in the outskirts of Denmark to another resting space in the outskirts of Denmark through the highway systems, driverless. If Volvo could guarantee the safety of this project, then I would be able to give the permit to do it.
So, and we'll give Mr. Kjellström, of course, an opportunity to respond. It's a good thing that the green light was on in the Parliament yesterday.
Only green lights, no red lights.
Well, that's good to hear, and thank you for that, Minister. We'll obviously talk more about the ramifications for politics later on in much more detail, which brings me to Associate Minister Tim McIndoe. Now, regardless of the fact that this is a relatively new task for you, still we obviously would like to hear New Zealand's position on this subject matter. Give us the main challenges that you're facing in the New Zealand context.
Well, I'm very conscious of the fact we don't have a vehicle manufacturing industry, so we are entirely dependent on what is coming to us and what is available from overseas. I think that for us, making sure that our regulatory framework takes note not only of that reality, but is also keeping at least pace with the game. We're very conscious of the fact that the technological innovators, the manufacturers who are out there are making huge leaps forward. This is exciting. This provides us with great opportunities. But it also means that we as regulators and politicians have to be incredibly smart in order to ensure that we keep up with things, because potentially it's the politicians who are going to hold the innovation back. And that's something that I'm very pleased to be here at this conference to get a sense as to how we're going to be able to rise to that challenge.
And politics, of course, Sarah Hunter is then in charge, as the minister said. Once it comes to me, I'm the one who has to greenlight it, perhaps with the new regulations or laws in that particular fashion. Now, the political enthusiasm is there. I think that much is clear just from the first statements we've heard. How for X, for Google here, how can you, of a company, capitalize on this political enthusiasm that's right now there?
Yeah, well, I agree. I think there is a lot of political enthusiasm. We have lots of countries come to us to say, how can we become the place that companies, not just Waymo or Google, but all the other companies can come and test in. I think that the challenge for all of us is, how do you get that enthusiasm to translate it into something really constructive? Because I see this as a safety technology. I see this as something that actually is going to improve the kind of goals that actually politicians want to achieve as well. So how do we blend the innovation drive with the safety drive of the policymakers into policy that incentivizes safety? That's the interesting thing for me. I think it's an exciting opportunity.
How to strike the right balance. Anders Kjellström, now we've heard from politicians, we've heard from X innovation platform. You represent, if you will, a traditional automobile manufacturer, Volvo. Is that something, is automated driving something that you at Volvo welcome, or is that rather a challenge to your business model?
Well, we are certainly welcoming it, and we have been doing so for decades, actually. We see much of automation as a long journey. It started way back with digitalization of the different systems on board the truck. And then we see very much of the automation as a journey for increased safety, so with the driver assist systems that are actively improving the safety. So that's a traditional company, and we're, of course, towards a journey where we may have and we will have driverless trucks as well. But there's that is a niche application for now, and the majority is for various degrees of automation on the public roads.
Without a doubt, this is a complex matter that will be facing. Christian Labro. Now, I know that the IRU produced a landmark report on managing the transition to driverless road freight transport. Can you, with the audience, share some of the key findings of that report?
Yes, thank you. Just in the morning, we launched in a press conference a report we have done together with ITF and the European manufacturers and as well the Transport Workers Organization to look at the transition period for autonomous driving. And I think it's very important to manage this transition period, to manage it proactively and not only looking what happens, so to model it, to be really active in it. And the question is, had been in the morning as well from the press, they always asking for the time frame. And of course, especially with special regards to our report about the driver. We have a real driver shortage in the moment. I think not only in Europe, it's all over the world. And for example, from my home country, as well. Not only IU president, I'm managing director of a German Association of Transport and Logistics. And if you look to the German market, we have 43% of all our truck drivers are aged 50 years and over, and only 3% are under 25. So, and if we are discussing from the social point of view, the new technology who will completely change the business model, we as well have to look at the drivers, what is happening with them. And if we look at this shortage and we want to close the gap with new young drivers, we have to make the job attractive. And saying in 10 years there will be autonomous vehicles only, you will be without a job again. So nobody would like to take this job opportunity. So it's many points to discuss, and but I think we will do it in this.
For sure. And when the self-driving technology will be ready, the question you've got asked during today's press conference is also obviously a question that I'm going to throw back at the panel in just a bit. But Brian Walker-Smith, as a professor of law, you coming from this perhaps from an entirely different perspective than the other five panelists. Now, in your
I like to think we get along just well.
so far, the panel. No, but I think you are working with politicians closely, obviously advising them. Would you say that politicians making a generalization, or if politics is ready for those technological changes? Do you think they are adapting at the rate that they ought to?
No, but they never are, and that's okay. It's a natural part of the process. We think of automated driving as a technology. That's how it's described, and it's not. It's actually a set of very diverse technologies, applications of those technologies, and business cases for those applications. And it's important to understand that diversity as policymakers approach these opportunities and challenges. And even though automated driving is itself so huge, it's actually only one part, albeit a politically and socially prominent part of all of the changes that are going to be coming in the next few years. And so rather than just talk about automated driving as this goal, policymakers should be focusing on the questions that the developers of these systems might not have the incentive to ask yet. And that's really, what do we want our world to look like in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And what role can automated driving play in that transition? And what role can other traditional policy strategies play in that tradition? Essentially, automated driving is a set of tools. We should use our tools. We should take care of our tools. We shouldn't worship our tools.
Minister Olesen, I would like to take up the point that Brian just raised. Is it for you as a politician, who's not a technician, not an engineer, if you will, is it possible for you to keep up with the rapid change, with the rapid technological advances that we're confronted with on a daily basis?
No, not at all. I think technological changes move the societies more than political changes. If you look back the last 100 or 200 years, it's more technology that has made our world than it is politics. So we cannot keep up. But to Brian, I don't really care how the roads look. What I care about is how we get people transported in the best way, fast and with less cost. And costs being not only economic costs, but also costs in form of environment and accidents and that stuff. So how it's going to look, I'm not an aesthetic. I'm interested in how it works and if it works good.
So if I understand you correctly, you are not in the position to shape the development, but rather react to it.
I would rather say that I'm making the law frame of it, and that law frame should enable development that is good for society. And I cannot foresee that development. I just have to keep watch of safety, pollution, that sort of things, and then let development get people transported better and faster.
So Mackendall, what do you think? What is the role of government here?
Well, I actually agree with both of the two previous speakers. I'm not sure that what they just said was mutually exclusive. I agree that how things look is important. We want to ensure that we roll out something that is really attractive for the future years. The role of government, I mentioned earlier that I think it's very important that we ensure that we don't allow the political system and the regulatory framework to hold things back. And to that extent, I agree with Minister Olsen that we are not in a position where we can keep up, but we've got to try to ensure that we are, if not level pegging, we're fast followers. I liked what Sarah said before about the fact that we've got to provide the right incentives, and I think by making the incentive to create the safest technology possible, we're going to be able to help shape something that is very attractive. In New Zealand, we have some advantages here. We have a unicameral parliament. We've sometimes had the reputation of being the fastest lawmakers in the West. But that means I think that we've got an opportunity perhaps to do something, even though we're a small country, not quite rising 5 million people at this stage. I think we have the opportunity in our political system, given the fact that we can possibly get regulation and legislative change through a little bit faster, to be playing a role here. And as I mentioned earlier, because we don't have a vehicle manufacturing industry ourselves, we have a very high need to ensure that we get this right, because otherwise we're going to find that we're bringing vehicles in from different parts of the world with possibly inconsistent standards, different things causing us problems. So to that extent, we're very keen to ensure that we are taking advantage of all the best opportunities and perhaps playing a leading role in that.
Anders Kjellström, you wanted to jump in here?
Yeah, I picked up the mic. I just wanted to pick up on Brian's comment here that automation is a lot more than just the technology. And I fully understand Ole here that he has, it's troublesome to keep up with the pace of technology development, and maybe you need not to, because technology advancement is very rapid, but what is new for my traditional industry, as you announced it as, is that we are moving away from a time when a vehicle or a truck or a bus was a kind of a standalone unit. With automation and connectivity, it becomes an integrated part of a transportation solution, and that involves a lot more stakeholders than ever before. So that impacts on insurance, it impacts on product liability, it impacts on drivers and regulation about drivers and so on and so forth. So the whole matter becomes a lot more complex, and that development for integrated and automated transportation solutions has a slightly slower pace than the technology in itself. So it's a lot more than just technology, that's for sure.
And Sarah, there seems to be a consensus related to autonomous driving, positive consensus that the impact on safety, on efficiency, on environment will be positive. As somebody whose, if you will, daily bread is innovation, do you see any pitfalls associated with automated driving?
Sure, there's lots of theoretical pitfalls ahead of us. I mean, I think we're just listening to this conversation, we're at a really interesting stage because this innovation has been talked about a lot, but there's very, very few people who've actually been in a driverless car, right? And so we're trying to have a conversation about the possibilities of the future without actually knowing in practice how it's going to work. And I think this will change in the next couple of years. To answer the question about when's it going to happen, I think in the next couple of years, you're going to have some deployment of fully autonomous vehicles in a very small number. Somewhere in the world, maybe a few places in the world, it'll be done in a small scale. And that will be when we all get a chance to see it in practice. And then the conversation will change again, because that's where the politicians get to say, okay, I see this working. What do I want in my country? Do I want it to be like this? Do I want it to be, what are the tools that I as a policymaker can apply to ensure that my location is, as Brian said, greener, safer, all the things you get to pick. So I actually think it's kind of hard right now to say these are the pitfalls and these are the outcomes, because we haven't actually done it yet.
It's rather theoretical at this stage, but if I understand you correctly, you're predicting the first test phase within the next couple of years?
That's my guess. I mean, sorry, I've been at Google too long to predict things. If any technologist will know that you should never make predictions, but that's my guess. Looking at where the industry is right now and how competitive it is right now and how much investment there is, I think in the next couple of years it'll be done at a small scale.
And speaking of advantages and disadvantages, as theoretical as they may be at this point, Christian Labro, I know that your sector is facing a driver shortage. Now, for you, this automated driving actually must be a gift sent from heaven, no?
Yes, at least it could close a little the gap a little bit, but I think it will completely change the business model as well, because I think governments are responsible to set the regulatory framework. And for the industry, it's most important to have the same framework, at least for a continent, let's say for Europe, for Asia as well, because our trucks don't stop at the borders. And we do everything electronically. We are on the way, for example, at IU doing our CMR as an electronic CMR document. We are on the way to have an electronic tier for the customs relations and the customs guarantee. So it's perfect to have as well some digital progress on the truck as well. But as said before, it has many advantages for safety and efficiency as well. But we have to look at the complete change of the operational of the operators, because I think, for example, in the future, not in 2 or 3 years, but in 10 to 15 years, there may be a change. Who is operating the trucks? Are the new Ubers, or are the manufacturers, the traditional ones, or still the transport operators from today? So it will completely restructure the business.
Brian, if and how the change will happen, I think so much, there's no disagreement here on this panel, that there will be very significant socioeconomic changes that will be accompanied by these change. Now, what role can law, your particular field, play in managing those socioeconomic changes which will inevitably come?
Law can provide both flexibility and certainty to the developers and the regulators and other people in this space. But to do that, lawmakers, policymakers need to not conflate two different levels of changes. The first is the macro level, the forest level, where automated driving and other technologies could potentially make the world a much better place. That's, I think, all of our hopes. Policy choices will determine whether that future is significantly better or marginally better. But that's the high level. The micro level, the trees in this discussion, are the individuals who are going to be affected. The truck drivers who at some point are going to lose their jobs. The people, rarely one hopes, but who might be killed by an automated vehicle when they would not have by a conventional vehicle. And these are the stories, the individuals. And we need to figure out both of those pieces so that we reach the best future for everybody, but we also manage the transition for people who will not necessarily be advantaged in the short term by the technologies.
And picking up on what Sarah said, how soon do you expect first test out phase to be seen on?
Oh, so it's entirely a question of definition. A vehicle that is capable of driving itself with no real-time human supervision in a very limited, defined geographic area, that's imminent. That's some combination of low speed, simple environment, and perhaps some form of remotely semi-supervised operation. And when you identify that piece narrowly enough, you can find the right set of conditions where a company will be willing to say, we can convince ourselves and the public that what we are doing in this environment is reasonably safe.
Minister Olesen, we talked about the socioeconomic changes that will inevitably be accompanied by automated driving. Now, as government, of course, people will look towards government then to say, okay, you have to protect the workers, the industries, for all the potential impacts on labor markets. Is that something that you have in mind, something that you're being approached to right now already, currently as we speak?
No, not yet. I don't think people really fear this yet. And I don't think it's that big an issue in a country like Denmark, maybe in France. In Denmark, people are more optimistic about the future. And we know that people got out of job when they worked in the agricultural business 100 years ago, and they got into the industry business. And then they got from the industry business to the service business. And now we see a new development. And of course, there will always be people saying this will make us jobless. But I think the big trend in a country like Denmark is we will manage this.
So the globally renowned optimism of Danes on full display here. But of course you are a relatively small country with a relatively small population and thus perhaps quicker able to absorb this change.
It's just a question also about institutions and history and I think in Denmark we see ourselves as a developing country. Development has been our history, we think, and at some point we were very big, and now we are very small, and we just figure things out as they go along.
Well, Christian Labro, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I like this optimism. So it's much better than all the pessimism we hear all over the world. But regarding to this, I think it's most important that the governments and the politics don't restrict innovation with regarding to labor, to safety or something else. So simply set up the rules, common rules, if possible, all over the world, and then let the markets play. And this has to be the solution. We don't, as an industry, we don't want to have restrictions on the markets or limited access to autonomous or driving and so on. So I think the optimism, that's why I wanted to jump in. That's positive, and that's the future, and not looking looking at all the things. Oh yeah, but this can happen and this can happen, and we as government have to regulate this and to safeguard the society. So that's not the right approach.
So focus more on the benefits.
Yeah. And focus as well, not only on the real autonomous truck or car. We will have a very long transition period, and there are very much advantages already in this transition period. For example, for safety, if we are looking to the trucking industry, to the manufacturing industry, if you see all the safety features we have now in a modern truck, with the braking systems, distance and lane assistance and everything. So it's much more safer. And the more a little bit partly autonomous we go, we already reach many of the advantages we will have at the end with a completely autonomous truck or car.
Jim McIndoe?
Yes, focusing on the benefits, absolutely, while also ensuring that we take the public along with us, because at the moment this is a world of great uncertainty, and we've got to ensure that we give them that. The reason I wanted to chime in is in your question to Minister Olesen, you asked whether we as politicians have a responsibility to protect our drivers and I guess the wider public from the change that's coming. I don't think it is our job to protect them from it. I think it's to prepare them for it, because we are in a generation that is already coping with some of the most incredible technological change across a whole range of industries. The jobs that we have today were unimaginable 30 years ago, and probably 10 and 15 years from now, our children will be in jobs that we can't contemplate right now. So as I say, I think the regulatory and political obligation is to ensure that we're getting the balance right, that we're incentivizing the safety angle in particular, clearly showing the public how this is such an exciting opportunity for the future, but also ensuring that we are preparing the workforce that is emerging for the opportunities that will present, rather than from thinking, well, gosh, my livelihood's at risk here, therefore I better resist it.
Prepare the public rather than protect them. Anders Hellström, speaking of the public, and more specifically about consumers, as somebody who's been in the automobile industry for a very long time, how do you think consumers will respond to driverless technology? Is that something which you expect people to flock to immediately, or rather take a sit back and observe attitude first?
Depends a little bit on how you define consumers, if that also incorporates our today's fleet customers, for example. But there's a high interest from our customers in automated solutions. That's for sure. So they pick up on all this media interest on automation, and there's a high desire from our customers. That's clear. About consumers and the public in general, I think that's why it's so important that we are able to run large-scale pilots with these new technologies, because already when we did this European Truck Platooning Challenge, for example, and we did some footage from helicopters and so on, we noticed how the public is responding to various degrees of automation on the roads. And this is a very, very important learning, actually. We haven't deployed so much of automation yet, so that we have got all that learning. But that is something that we need to learn, and we need to run pilots in order to get that knowledge. And that is really important, and that's why it's so good with these bills that we are able to run such tests, because the public's response to automated vehicles in real life is something we really have to address.
And how would you rate Volvo's readiness for the change that is before us?
Yeah, well, I think, of course, since I'm a representative of Volvo, I think we're very, very, very well prepared.
Surprising.
But there's a lot of dynamic in play here. We are already operating fully autonomous trucks in underground mines. No one has seen it, so it's underground. I've been there driving them, or riding them, actually. We also have excavators and wheel dumpers in mines that are operating fully autonomous. And we are learning from that, and that is creating actually different kinds of jobs. So that's an interesting part of our journey. But the vast majority is the on-road and lower degrees of autonomy. We also are very active.
Sarah, there seems to be a consensus that automated driving will lead to, that it will have a positive impact on travel safety. Is that a foregone conclusion? Do you think that automated driving will result necessarily in safer conditions for all road users, or the jury's still out there?
Well, from the limited results of data we have on how humans currently drive, I think it probably is. I mean, if you look at the data, we all like to think we're all personally pretty good drivers, but everyone else is bad. The news, I'm afraid to say, we're all pretty bad in some conditions. So when we're at our best as humans, we drive really well. But how many of us are really at our best all the time? How many of us are tired or distracted and sitting at the traffic lights texting? I mean, the behaviors that you see in cars are generally not great. And yet machines don't ever get distracted or tired or sleepy or drunk, I read some data that said that when they analyzed cars that had an accident, in 40% of cases, the driver hadn't even put their foot on the brake. So just that, our cars will definitely break. There's lots of things you can do with autonomous vehicles, like in the US, most accidents happen at crossroads, where there's traffic lights and people jump the lights. So we've programmed our cars to wait for a second and a half after the lights change, so that if there is a red light runner, we don't get hit by them. So simple things like that can be programmed in that I'm sure are going to result in a reduction in accidents.
Now, this may be a naive follow-up question. I want to ask Brian as well. The technology to produce automated driving surely must have been there. Why are we talking about this now? Why has the debate intensified in recent times? Is it because companies like Google are turning it up a notch?
Well, no, I don't think the technology has been there, to be honest. I mean, I think to Brian's earlier point, cars are like the canary in the coal mine for a whole sweep of changes within every sector. You know, in the last 20 years, we've created the internet, which is like a virtual world. You know, companies like Google have created this sort of amazing set of technologies, huge processing powers, tiny chips, sophisticated algorithms. And in the next 20 years, we're going to fuse those tools of the virtual world with our physical world. So actually, the technology has only just come to pass. And that's why it was Google who was the first company to do this, because we were the ones who understood the power of the internet technologies and thought, well, why don't you apply this to the real world? So we're seeing it start with cars, but we'll see it in utilities and healthcare and all different aspects of our physical world. And I think the change is going to be really dramatic. I mean, if you thought the last 20 years was big news, you just wait.
Brian, as an internationally recognized expert on the law of self-driving vehicles, first I want to throw the last question to you again. Why do you think this debate here at the ITF Forum is just an example of it? Why are we talking about it now in such great detail and with such great imminency?
Because there's money to be made in a way that there wasn't a few years ago, and that has a way of raising the profile of anything. And part of that has been a lot of excitement about the potential for not just automated driving, but as Sarah said, a range of technologies. And this is why it's so important to manage public expectations, so that the public understands the potential of these technologies, but doesn't have wildly unrealistic expectations, so that every crash is seen as a catastrophe or as a massive failure. At an individual level, so that people are not abusing or misusing lower levels of automation, where they think, oh, the technology is quote unquote ready, and therefore I can go to sleep while I'm using my driver assistance system. These are real dangers. And so to pick up on two of the really good points that were made, I think we need to talk less about public acceptance. Companies will manage acceptance. Smartphones were accepted. But we need to talk more about earning trust and evaluating trustworthiness, to shift from acceptance to trust in the public sphere. And part of that is to echo the second really good point that was made, to recognize that today's status quo is far from perfect, that well over 1 million people are dying on the roads each year. You are transport experts. I need not recite these to you. But the public does not internalize these numbers or these tragedies until it happens to them. Our regulatory system is far from imperfect. And this interaction between our imperfect status quo and any new technology, including automated driving, makes a lot of things weird. So sometimes these imperfections could advantage automated driving. For example, fuel taxes that are imposed on fuel rather than energy use would be to the advantage of a likely electric automated vehicle fleet. Sometimes these imperfections can disadvantage new technologies, and that's, I think, a particular concern in this field. Sometimes new technologies can ameliorate imperfections. Perhaps automated driving, we certainly hope, will make driving safer, and sometimes new technologies can actually exacerbate these imperfections. And starting with this reality that we have an imperfect system, and we shouldn't just take that as the best and given, and look at how we should change that system broadly using technology is the important policy question.
So managing public expectations is key here. What do you foresee are some of the great disappointments that the public will face once we do see a rollout of automated driving?
Well, the first systems won't be everywhere all the time in every way. And that will be both exciting and alienating for some people. There is a whole range of unanticipated consequences, some that will be marvelous, some that we will look back and say, why didn't we think of that? And some that will be hitting our head and saying, oh, shoot. I go back 100 years when the motor vehicle was introduced, and people said, this is fantastic. The motor vehicle will solve our pollution problem for all time. Why did they say that? Well, it turns out that the average horse deposits about 10 kilos of manure every day. In New York City at the turn of the century, there were 100,000 horses, and horses had a way of dying on the street and losing their value. Whereupon they would be abandoned. And so this was an incredible pollution problem. People said, the car has solved pollution for all time. Fast forward and we figure out that's not actually quite true. And so we'll have those similar challenges in the future, and we'll need to be flexible to address them.
Is it, and perhaps a question to all of you, if I hear you speak like this, seems to me it's not a zero-sum game, that perhaps automated driving will not lead to the complete eradication of drivers. Will we rather see a coexistence between automated driving and still human drivers?
Yeah, totally, and it will take a long time. I mean, let's not, to your point about managing expectations, in the next few years, we will see this happen very real in a few places. But then it's going to take us a long time to get it spread out. And that's great for all of us. That's great for the policymakers. That's great, not so great for the companies wanting to make a lot of money. But, for all of us to build our trust around cars that drive themselves, this time it will take will be a good thing. So yes, coexistence is inevitable. And that will be messy,
So it's good news for companies like Volvo then?
Yeah, I fully share that view, and much of our driver for developing automation is in fact to make driving more attractive, and to maintain drivers, and to make driving more safe. And that always involves a driver.
And if I get the political voices involved before we get some questions from the audience, Minister Olesen, if everything you've heard up until now, the media, if you will, wants to, or rather conveys an image as if this is just around the corner, and the whole globe with its 7 billion people will be subjected to automated driving. Doesn't seem to be that way.
Well, I'm not the expert on this topic, but to me it seems obvious that highway trafficking in a few years can be automated. Why shouldn't it? The cars we have today almost can drive autonomously on the highways. So this would be a huge, huge step forward for people driving 2 or 3 hours a day, just getting into the car and relaxing and being driven 200 or 300 kilometers away to their destination. This is huge. But of course, driving in cities and stuff like that, that's further away, I think.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, it is a simple yes and no answer, because yes, we will have autonomous driving, but for our perspective, it's more on the long distance. It's on the motorways. That's the same with the driver question. We will need drivers for doing the city distributions, going into regional traffic and so on. There we will need the driver, and there will be a long wait until we do this autonomous as well. But on the long distance, on the highways, why not operating more cost efficiently, more environmental friendly? For example, with platooning trucks with 5 trucks guided by one driver. So it will be a transition period. And for example, if we are talking about law, in Germany just last week we had the fundamental law for autonomous driving, but it's still said in the law, the last responsibility is at the driver. So you see the perspective. It will still be a long way, but many things will happen faster than we think.
We've talked quite rightly over the fact that safety assurances are going to be vitally important, and I think Sarah is quite right in saying this is not going to happen overnight, but it is going to happen incrementally, and presumably it will accelerate as people start to see the advantages. I think another thing that is going to win people over in time will be the advantages of ride sharing. I mean, I take my own country, you would assume that we wouldn't have major problems with congestion because we're a small population, but in fact we do, and the city of Auckland would be one of the most congested cities for transport in the world at the moment. That's partly because we have 1.3 people per vehicle, and there are geographical reasons, and also the fact that as a small country we don't have either the infrastructure or the culture associated with public transport that the Europes and the Scandinavians and the North Americans have. We're a country where people like to be in their cars. So by getting them sharing their rides and seeing the huge difference that that is going to make relatively quickly, I think, in overcoming congestion, that will be a real incentive to accelerate the rollout of this technology.
Brian, is there one aspect, as somebody who deals with this subject matter on a daily basis and with great intensity, is there one aspect that we've been missing, one crucial aspect in regards to automated driving, which you can relate to from your daily work, where you say that this is a crucial point that has not been touched upon?
I would say it's not just a question for the ministries of transport. Go back and shout to your colleagues in all the ministries and departments. Be ready. Think about this. Think about this as a set of challenges and opportunities for social welfare, for the environment, for education. Again, as a set of challenges and opportunities, everybody should be thinking about these technologies.
Sarah?
Yeah, I guess the thing we haven't talked about, which I increasingly see as important, is the role of mayors and city councils. You know, we talk about national policymakers and sort of the overarching framework, but when it comes to deployment, mayors are going to be incredibly powerful. You know, you've seen it with the rollout of Uber, for example. You know, access to curb space, parking uprights. It's incredibly valuable, and that's what all of these vehicles are going to need. So how do we sort of not just have the conversation at a national and almost international level, but also at a very, very local level? Because that's where really these things are going to, that's the battleground, if you like, where it's actually going to thrive or fail.
Now, it's become abundantly clear that we have great expertise on this panel, but I know we have also a lot of expertise in the audience, and I would like to make use of it by giving you an opportunity to either ask a question or a comment on everything you've heard up until now, or perhaps a point we've missed. I think we have microphones in the back, and I think we already have the gentleman in the back. Gentleman in the back, if we can get the microphone to him, and if you can quickly introduce yourself. We need automated microphones, it seems a way.
It's on, is that on? Yeah. It's John Stone from the University of Melbourne. It's a question really to the political representatives and perhaps also to Google. You've talked a lot about safety as being one of the things that these can offer, but I've been thinking a lot about some of the negative impacts. For example, will we be increasing the amount of time people are in vehicles, and so therefore the health impacts of lack of activity that we might generate through these, and also the problems of encouraging driving. If it's much more convenient, as you were just saying, to drive on the freeway, then will we drive further? Will our cities spread further? So we have health impacts which are hugely costly to the economy, and we have sprawling cities which also have huge costs. So how are these things going to be regulated and developed in ways which give us more activity and more compact cities?
Right, thank you. Well, throw to the audience. Sarah, Minister Olesen, Mr. McIndoe, who wants to take that?
I'll let the politicians not have to answer this one just yet by saying, I think those are great questions and things we think about a lot, but now is not the time that we're able to answer them. We need some data. And you might think that's inevitable, that a company like Google would say we need the data. But I think it's true, like the extent to which that is what happens versus the extent to which that isn't happens, we will only know when we start actually doing some of this at a small scale. So I really think that early data gathering and analysis needs to be done once we start doing it somewhere, and then have the political conversation.
Brian?
I agree completely. I would add that we know these are problems today with our existing transport system. And we can actually help along automated driving by addressing these problems today. So if sprawl is occurring, address the price of fuel, address the low price of parking in a way that eliminates some of these hidden subsidies, some of these externalities, so that when automated driving arrives, it will arrive at a level playing field and will not have disproportionate effects. Now, this is a challenge for you as policymakers. How much do you leverage automated driving to try to solve some of these bigger problems? And how much do you avoid putting excess baggage on automated driving, weighting it down with new requirements that are not imposed on conventional vehicles and drivers? This is a really tough balance.
Well, it's very difficult to predict, especially to predict the future. The question about health. Yes, some people will throw away their bike and jump into the app-serviced sharing car that gets to their home address and drives them to the destination. But also some people are, right now in my country, getting out of the buses and onto the electric bikes, because that's a new form of transportation. And the only good question to this is, we cannot plan the future in the great detail that you right now, I heard, asked from us. The future is uncertain. The only thing we can do is to have a legal framework that supports that when people act, when they move in the cities and on the countryside, that they do not harm others. And if we have that framework in place, that is a good framework for development. That is the minimal framework that we need to have. And it also, it's, in my opinion, but then again, I'm a liberal, it's the maximum framework we need to have.
All right. Let's take some more. All right. This is. Yeah, go ahead.
May I just push a little bit for cooperation and dialogue? I think this ITF report is a good example of that, because we, as a manufacturer of vehicles, we have a tendency, of course, of being fascinated of what we can achieve and the challenges that we face and the opportunities that we see. But we need to look upon this from many different perspectives, and that's why dialogue and cooperation is very important from the various stakeholders. So that's a key success factor, and we are fully aware about that question about the well-being of drivers, of course. But we, as you said, we don't have the answers yet.
I've seen quite a few hands go up at once. So let's take him. This gentleman there in the back, yes, has had his hand up for some time. I try to get in as many as possible.
Thank you very much. My name is Jack Short of Trinity College Dublin. Thank you for a very nice discussion. It's a very important topic. If you don't mind me starting with a little story, when cars started first in 1900 or so, they said, because then they had to have an official driver, this thing will never catch on because we'll never get enough people who want to be drivers. So things have really changed, haven't they? Now we're trying to get rid of the drivers again. Now, my questions were two. The first was a very interesting discussion you had about leading or being led. Is technology leading, or can we in somehow lead technology? And could I suggest that perhaps what we try and do is that we try and lead technology in the direction of our policy aims, which mainly for me would be safety, but there are others. So that could we find some way to sequence the kinds of innovations that are coming so that the safest ones are introduced first, and we turn all the levers to bring all those safety things in first. I'm thinking, for example, of automatic emergency braking. And then the other question is the legal one that you touched on but didn't finish, and it was the legal responsibilities with the driver. That's in all the international texts, and it's still in the Vienna Convention and everything. How are we going to move away from blaming the driver all the time? And what is the sequence where we don't just give full responsibility to the driver, but there is some sort of shared responsibility along the way? How is the law going on that issue? Thank you.
Okay. In the interest of time, for those who feel that this is a question that pertains to you, keep it in mind, because I do want to take 2-3 more questions, and then we'll throw it back to the audience. Is this a lady in the back that I'm? Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, great discussion. In building public trust, how important is hacking or viruses? What is the role of government in creating a trust around cars being secure, not for data security, protecting against the car being taken over, but also spoofing the sensors to make them behave in strange ways?
Hacking, cyber attacks, important subject matter. Go ahead, please. Go to this side. This lady, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I will try to be short. So you mentioned that autonomous driving is a set of technologies, not only for the vehicle. You also mentioned an integrated approach and process. And I would like to ask, how is infrastructure included in the right regulation? So how do governments think of infrastructure, road infrastructure, when regulating automated and autonomous vehicle driving? Thank you.
All right. Why don't we answer this first set of 3 questions? First, Brian, yes, go ahead.
Great, so I'll answer your good story with a story. When drivers started driving cars, there was a question whether the passenger in the car or the driver in the car should be liable in the event of a crash. And that got sorted out in the same way that through some combination of finesse, frankly, some legal fiction, and some good faith interpretation, we're going to get over the formal challenges in the international conventions and in domestic law to reconcile liability with technical function and responsibility. So that if you're really a user of the system, you are not going to have expectations that are unrealistically placed on you, either technically or legally. And cybersecurity is an important part of this question. If this is the vast number of fatal crashes today, there are a whole many, and people usually don't care about them unless they're personally affected. This will be this much smaller number of automated vehicle crashes. People will pay attention. That will make the news. Up here at the way top, that's the crashes that are caused in some part by an alleged cybersecurity failure, and people will freak out. And understanding that is important, and that's why this role of narrative is so important to the field.
Thank you. Any other one who has heard a question that they would like to respond to?
I'll just echo the point about cybersecurity being a big thing that everyone needs to plan for, not just in cars, but in, I was talking about the sort of digitization of the real world. We saw it a couple of weeks ago with the big hack that brought down the NHS, the British health system. This is just going to happen more and more, and the role of government to be internally technically equipped to just understand what's happening, I think, is the first step. Whether or not they can do anything about it is a different conversation, and I think the companies who don't currently have a software-first mentality are going to have to get one, because, as a company that does and has, been on the receiving end of multiple attempts to hack us over the years, you need to invest in this. You can't just take it for granted. It is a big issue.
Minister Olesen?
It's on the question of infrastructure. I hope that this development will come from technology inside the car and not from new infrastructure, because this last process will be very slow. It's a political process. The first process is a commercial process. It's much faster.
And there was a question also about the possibility of policymakers to lead this evolution and kind of set the rules for technology. I would prefer that we work side by side and hand in hand, because what we fear and what we must avoid is that regulators in different parts of the world just pick and choose, and that we get tied up into not relevant regulations in some areas and which are not based on fact and science and experience. So I think you're working collaboratively and simultaneously together is the key, not someone to lead and someone pulls the accelerator and someone is braking. That's not the good way. We need to work together.
The plea for cooperation and coordination.
Absolutely.
In that regard. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just coming back to your remark about infrastructure, everything should be in the car and the trucks at the more expensive way, of course, but maybe the faster one. But I want to come back to the data question, and there's some other question. It's not only for cyber attacks. It's a question: to whom do the data belong to? Who's really managing them? Is it the truck or the car manufacturer? Is it my as a owner, my private data, or who is managing and who is storing the data? Because you know, data today is always a business case, having the data, and I think that's a very important question we have to discuss as well. And for example, from our point of view as IU for the trucking business, maybe it's a complete independent body. It's not the government. It's not the manufacturer. So it's maybe us, for example, or anybody else being more neutral than the manufacturer, or the governments. Because if the government has the data, you always have punishment in mind and everything.
All right, we have 10 minutes left in this discussion, so let's get in another round of 3-4 questions before we wrap it up. Go ahead, this gentleman who's been having his hand up for a while.
Thank you very much. Barry Kildare, National Transportation Authority of Ireland. I was just interested in as a transport planner, we've been spending an awful lot of time fixing the problems that were introduced by previous technology, the car, and trying to rework the cities back towards what the public seem to be telling us that they want. And I wondered about the role of government in that aspect of this process, not necessarily just purely the regulation of the actual vehicles, but rather the ensuring and regulating of the outcome, that it aligns with what the public is looking for in a wider context, the kind of trend towards safe, urban, walkable cities with interactions that this might mitigate against.
All right, questions for the lawmakers on the panel. Gentlemen, go ahead. Microphone is coming to you.
Thank you, Eddie van Bouwer with ExxonMobil. I have a question which is somewhat related to infrastructure and traffic management systems, and that's something I haven't heard in the debate so far. In terms of giving signals to the cars to drive at certain speeds or to help the traffic flow. And as an example, country where I'm coming from, Belgium, used to have a system a couple of years ago when there was a busy weekend and everybody wanted to go to the coast. They introduced block driving on the motorway to get, all the traffic go at a uniform speed, and that really increased the road capacity. So what possibilities are there?
Is there a particular panelist you would like to address your question to?
No, but this goes to the infrastructure and,
okay, so whoever
side of it.
feels that they're being spoken to, go ahead, please. This lady right here. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Larissa Teichert of LAT. We're in railroad. We have a huge advantage in this generation in that we are really well connected in terms of communication, and different to when the horse came along and in the car, we can actually share the knowledge, and we're all going through this experience at the same time. So my question to the panel is, how can we ensure that when we all have similar experiences at the same time, that we collect the data, and even more important, the failures, not to say to blame anyone, but the learnings connected to the failures, so that we don't have to work alongside, but can kind of connect with each other. And maybe the OECD can play a role in that, I don't know, but I think it's really beneficial to all of us if
All right.
we kind of share the knowledge in that process.
All right, thank you so much. With apologies, I conclude the Q&A part because we have 8 minutes left, and I do obviously want to give the panel the opportunity to respond to the final round of 3 questions. Also use this as an opportunity to say your final words on this panel, no worries. This is some message that you want to get out, and perhaps we'll start counterclockwise with Brian's.
So I'll pick up on the last great point that was made and say that for developers of these systems, my challenge is to engage in a public compact, make what I call a public safety case, to go to the public and say, this is what reasonable safety means to us. This is how we define and measure it and monitor it, not just at the day of production, but over the entire lifetime of the system. And there are 2 parts in that. The first is the very public aspect. It's not just to a regulator, it's to the public at large. And the second is this reliance on data over the lifetime of the system. So that's my challenge to developers, and it's a challenge that I think regulators can play a role in. You know, one of the questions that we're all asked a lot is what can a government do at this point to help the technologies or to achieve the policy goals that the technologies might facilitate? And I would make 3 real recommendations. The first, rather selfishly, read ITF's very good recent report on that question. I have at newlypossible.org a list of 50 strategies that governments can employ. But part of that is identifying entity or even person within every level of government who can act almost as a Sherpa or a guide for these technologies and their developers, to help the developers, whether large or small and startups, figure out the key questions and work their way through all of the potential regulatory challenges that might exist. And the third and final suggestion I would give in that regard really comes back to your point about data as well, which is, I used to think that simply providing correct data was enough. That was the obligation of public actors. And that's clearly not the case. We need to be more aware of how information is received in the world, received by the public, and to think about the narratives that we're creating. So in every activity that we take with respect to these technologies, ask, what is the narrative? Is it a truthful, credible, robust narrative supported by data, but also how do we communicate that most effectively to the public that we hope ultimately will benefit from these technologies?
All right, thank you. Tim McIndoe?
Okay, very quickly in answer to a couple of the questions, I absolutely agree that sharing the information, the learnings is going to be critical, and I would hope that we're already seeing a commitment internationally to doing that, because we all want to learn from best practice and we all want to learn quickly from the experience. As far as the question from the gentleman from Belgium is concerned, I imagine it's going to take some time to have the critical mass in order to achieve the sort of consistency that you're looking for, but one would hope that over time, as automated vehicles become far more common, that we would see efficiencies gained through regulated speed limits and having programmed speed for and other things for the conditions that exist at the time. And they might be climatic, they might be congestion, they could be focused around an accident or a major civil disaster or something of that sort. Rather parochially, I'm going to take up Ali's invitation to get out a message, and that is, as I understand it, New Zealand is one of the few countries in the world at the moment that already does not have in legislation a requirement for a driver to be in the vehicle. I'm staying ready to be corrected on that, but we Our previous lawmakers, for some reason, it was probably an oversight, did not require that or set it in our legislation. And I draw that to your attention because I think that New Zealand has some natural advantages to be a part of the testing regime over the next decade and more. And I would encourage you to think about New Zealand's receptiveness to being a part of this testing regime, and also the fact that because we can already test automated vehicles on our roads, I mean, subject to certain constraints that would be set by the New Zealand Transport Authority and other agencies, the opportunity to test your vehicles in our country is one that I would hope that you might be very interested in. And so, as I say, that's a very parochial message. We're keen to embrace this technology and be a part of the change.
Christian Lebro.
A short remark to the sharing of data. You had been talking about infrastructure, and I think just in this point it's very necessary for the governments to have the real infrastructure all over the country. If you are traveling through Germany, there are kilometers, 10, 20 kilometers, you have no data network. And if you want to have autonomous driving vehicles or this kind of data sharing, you will have problems. So it's a responsibility for the governments as well to safeguard the right infrastructure, digital infrastructure. But to come back to, and you asked for a conclusion, I think it's autonomous driving, and partly autonomous driving is not only a technical question. It has to be discussed inside the society. It's with all stakeholders, not only from the technical side. And from my personal view, it will be a step-by-step approach. But the developments will be faster than we are all thinking about. And I think the transport industry is really ready to support the developments, because there's a trend to safer environment and to more efficient more efficiently doing the business.
Minister Olsen.
Well, I just have one result I would like to share with you. The Danish road authorities and the Danish Safe Traffic Association made a common research on the accidents that have taken place on Danish roads. And they found that if drivers had used the latest technology in driver's assistance, which is already out there, then up to 30% of the accidents would have not taken place. So this is the technology we have now, and I think the future will be even brighter.
Ending on a high note, on a positive note, fittingly for the Danish, Anders Kjellström.
Thank you. I really appreciated all your questions, and it's obvious that there are a lot of questions that are still don't have answers, and because automation has not really taken off yet. It starts to happen at a higher degree as we speak. So that's why coordination and cooperation and dialogue is key to make this happen in a good way. We think that initiatives such as, for example, the European Truck Platooning Challenge, to pilot these systems in a cross-functional and in a cross-border way along corridors is a very good way to establish such communication and development at the same time, and involving all the key stakeholders. So I'm looking forward to the future, and I'm absolutely convinced that regardless of how it plays out, it will be cleaner, it will be safer, and it will be more efficient.
Sarah, you get the final word.
Yeah, that was almost Californian levels of optimism, I have to say. I feel very at home here. I just at that final point about this is a different world that we're innovating in. I couldn't agree more. We have 7 billion mobile phones on this planet, and 10 years ago we had 0 smartphones. I mean, it's extraordinary, this new capability that the public have to share their views. And because this is a technology that, as I said, is a canary in a coal mine for a whole host of other stuff that's coming down the road, you don't have to worry. Like, the companies that are innovating, mine is one of them, are definitely listening to the public view on this. That there is no world in which the millions of tweets and posts about your experience in a autonomous vehicle, around an autonomous vehicle, companies will be looking very closely at how everyone reacts, because we all want to make it work, you know. I mean, it's fascinating to work in a field where both politicians and innovators are all aligned on using technology to make the world safer. So I actually think the public will be the ones that we all listen to make sure that happens.
Unanimously, this panel ending on a high note, on a positive note, on the right regulation, on automated and autonomous driving. I think I speak for all when I say this discussion obviously could have gone on for much longer. Very much great detail, a lot of substance that we've produced here on this panel, and needless to say, a subject matter that will be with us for a very long time to come. Who knows at the ITF 2018 what a panel on this particular subject matter might produce as results. So I understand that the next sessions will be coming up here on the slides, so you will see the next sessions coming up. There you go. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention, your active participation. And we're concluding this panel, of course, very fittingly with a great round of applause for our spectacular panelists. Thank you.